50 years ago this year, the Soviet Union built a barrier that would divide not just East Berlin from West Berlin, but Eastern Europe from Western Europe. It was the most dramatic physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain, which ran like a scar across this great city, dividing families, friends and neighbours from each other. In the month which marks the anniversary of the destruction of the Berlin Wall, on this evening's programme we'll be exploring how it affected ordinary people who found themselves at the front line of the global conflict between capitalism and communism. First, the remarkable story of a woman who made a dramatic escape from East Berlin when she was a teenager. Inga Eulitz, you're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
The Berlin Wall went up in August 1961 and you were 16 years of age at that stage. You were on holidays at the time the wall went up. What do you remember of it?
We knew something dramatic must be happening because all the soldiers who were there in their uniform, my brother was there, he was in the Marines, they were all called back. And I heard that barbed wire was, but nobody actually believed it was going to be there forever. I mean, nobody believed it was there to stay, because we have been told all these years in school and then in college that we had to find a way of keeping the West capitalists out of our part of the country, because the reason why we couldn't buy anything, may it be bananas or nice clothes, cars, there was waiting lists for cars up to 10 years. We were made to believe that is all the capitalists doing. They are, coming over and they're getting our stuff cheap. So I personally felt that maybe, it's right to do that, to stop them from literally robbing us clean.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, I'm afraid I was very much for it, And
the actual school you were in was on the eastern part of a street that
was
divided by the wall?
Yeah, actually both. I went for the first 2 years. I was in a school in the Bernauer Straße. Actually, for the first 6 months, I was in that particular school. And Bernauer Straße, I think, became quite famous because if you would imagine Grafton Street, and just where Brown and Thomas is, they built a wall from one side of the street to the other. So before you could go up and down, all of a sudden, that was it.
Yeah.
And that was pretty unbelievable. And then I felt also it was getting serious. We were then moved to Wilhelmstraße, which is just literally around the corner from Brandenburger Gate. And right opposite our school is what was called the Hitler Bunker. And at that stage, it was beautiful green grass. And all right through the middle of that, again, the barbed wire was rolled up. There were tanks everywhere. Both we could see the east, and at that stage we could still see the west. Because the actual wall was built very gradually. So during the first few months, quite a few people were able to cross here, there, or everywhere, because East Germans just didn't have enough barbed wire to put around Germany.
Can you remember when your mind started changing about this wall? Did it happen fairly quickly?
Yes. When my boyfriend came to visit me, just on a 24-hour visa, he came into East Berlin, and then I left him back at 12 o'clock midnight, and then the next morning he would come again.
So he was based in West Berlin?
He was based in Ireland, actually. He's German, but based in Ireland. Leaving him back, and I couldn't go through, gave me a kind of a squeezy feeling in my stomach. I said, Jesus, why? But I mean, that's the way it was. And then we heard over some grapevine, because we weren't really allowed to listen to Western stations, but we heard that somebody escaped, a fellow student escaped. And at that stage, that was a year later, they had not only built the wall in Berlin, they had built a second wall. So you had the first wall, then you had no man's land, and then you had another wall. And it became higher and higher and higher. They put mines in between the two walls, And if there was water, they put mines into the water. So it became almost impossible then to escape. This guy tried it, got shot by the East German police. He was shot down. He lay right in the middle of the no man's land. The West German police were watching on that side. The East Germans were on that side. Nobody went to rescue him for the simple reason they thought the shooting would start. The guy, anyway, bled to death. When he was eventually brought away by the East Germans, there were absolute riots on the West Berlin side. On our side, there were no riots. I said, this is not right, you know.
And do you think you reached a stage where you decided, I have to get out of here? Or was your boyfriend an influence in that sense?
No, my boyfriend was the influence. He started telling me about Ireland.
Did he make it sound like a place you wanted to be?
Yes. He told me about the beautiful palm trees, which there are, and that you can leave them out winter and summer. He told me about how beautiful and slim the women were in Ireland. That is because they looked after themselves. They didn't have to work. I mean, it was just like...
And you were very young.
Dreamland, yeah. And I was studying extremely hard during that time. And all the stress with him coming over and then going back again, I just felt that I wouldn't mind seeing Ireland.
Yeah. And what was the actual plan for the escape?
Well, he didn't tell me that, you know. He left it up in the air because he knew that I didn't really want to go. I literally only found out 2-3 days before we actually escaped how it was going to be done. So I told him that if I do it, and I still didn't give my absolute okay, I just want to see my parents just once more.
Yeah.
And so we arranged to meet in Leipzig at my aunts and my cousins and my parents. And it was terrible because I knew what I was most likely going to do the next night, and I couldn't tell them. It still breaks my heart talking about it.
That you couldn't say goodbye?
Yeah.
Must have been incredibly difficult.
The next night, he said to me, it's a good night to go. And so we went on to a place where there were no people. And that's when he showed me what he had done with the car. And we tried it. And
this was strapping you underneath it?
Yeah. We tried it, and he said, look, this is going to work. I'm going to drive slowly. I avoid potholes and whatever. So we did it that night. We went to Berlin, and then just a little bit before Friedrichstraße, we went into a side street. I went underneath. I was sure they were going to get us.
You're terrified?
I was more thinking about what excuse I was going to give if they get me. But that was just to not to get too frightened, you know.
Yeah.
So I was going to say I just wanted to try it. I would have come back. And, you know, I was 17 at that stage. And we got through, you see, because he came to visit me every night, the police at the border at Checkpoint Charlie actually got to know him. And he let them believe that he is moving back to East Berlin. And then he told me that they check him less and less. And the night we escaped, it was raining, and we had to pick a night like this because they had dogs and all that. And it took a while to get through because the way they built the wall, you had to go around corners, and then it seemed to take forever. And I could actually see them walking around. I think the whole thing took maybe 25 minutes getting through. And then he stopped the car, And I could hear him lighting a cigarette. And I said, can I get out now, you know? And he said, no, we're still in no man's land on the bridge. There were naturally no mines. So he got back into the car, and it took maybe another minute or so. And then we were on the other side, but he still didn't stop. There were the West Berlin police were there on the other side. So he drove slowly on, and then again in a side street. And then he told me, look, he said, you're only 17. They would actually send you straight back. They wouldn't even let you in. So then I had to go in hiding for 3 weeks, which were the most miserable 3 weeks of my life because I was so homesick.
Where were you able to hide?
In his brother's apartment.
And were you conscious of, obviously, your family at home and you not turning up for school, that there were going to be all sorts of...
All
questions?
this I heard then much, much, much later.
Yeah.
But I wrote from the first day. I started writing a letter to my parents. I couldn't send it because I wanted to be 18 first. So every day then I wrote. On my 18th birthday then I posted it, and then I went to the authorities.
So you turned 18 just a few weeks after you escaped?
Yeah.
And the situation with you then in West Berlin, you had no passport.
No.
Your boyfriend had gone back to work in Ireland, presumably.
Yeah. He went back to play in the symphony orchestra and just mentioned it to a colleague of his, and he had somebody working in a newspaper. And then all hell broke loose. I mean, all of a sudden, there were newspapers together with him. They came to Berlin. We were brought for dinner.
You became quite famous.
Yeah. And they must have got some emergency passport. It wasn't a proper passport, some emergency thing, because they then flew me to Shannon.
And arriving into Shannon, it must have been a big culture shock. You didn't speak English at that stage.
No, I spoke Russian.
Yeah.
And then when I flew to Shannon, they put somebody's coat over me. And in order for the other papers not to get, I don't know why.
Yeah, well, this was a coup for them.
It was, yeah. It was pretty dramatic.
And were you able to tell your parents that you were in Ireland?
Well, first of all, when I sent that letter in Berlin, I apologized for not telling them what my plans were. But I did that for the police. From what I heard after then, they really gave my parents a hard time. They opened every letter that I posted, but I kind of, thought they might.
Yeah.
So I didn't really say in it anything incriminating my parents or anything like that. Telephoning was very difficult because I had to book a call to East Germany, and it took sometimes up to 4 hours before I got a phone call to say the connection is there. But again, on the telephone, what do you say?
Yeah, you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
Did it take long before you saw your parents again?
I saw my parents again in the late 70s.
That was a long wait.
It was, yeah.
And obviously a very emotional reunion as well.
Very much. Very, very much.
How were you able to relate to your parents having gone so long without seeing them at what was still a relatively young age?
Well, to be perfectly honest, the very first time I went home, I was just for a weekend, basically, a long weekend. And we spoke literally only about the escape. And that's for the first time I realized what grief I actually caused them.
Yeah.
But it never occurred to me that I had actually hurt them. I really give them a hard time.
Yeah.
They were harassed in a big way by the East German police. Well, of course, they missed me.
Yeah.
My mother, I think she must have been crying for the first year non-stop. I didn't think about all these things. I was too busy trying to get on with my life here,
And did it make a difference when Eastern Germany was recognised as a separate state? The practicalities of that?
When I heard that Willy Brandt, who was Chancellor in Germany at the time, recognised East Germany as a separate state, and this is what East Germany always wanted. East Germany then said, okay, everybody who escaped before 1967 is no longer considered East German citizen. So I rang the German embassy here in Dublin. I said I should really fall under that category, you know. So they told me, you will, if you want to go back, if you want to take a chance, it will be a risk. We won't be able to help you. But I was going to take that risk. So my brother organized a visa for me.
Even though he would have disapproved of what you had done originally, presumably.
Yeah, but I was his sister.
Yeah, that was more important.
Yeah, that was more important. But I got this visa and I went across the border, and I tell you, I think my heart was in my knees and I was shaking. But I was determined to go through, and nobody bothered me. Yeah. I mean, absolutely nobody. In fact, thinking now, the more West German money that was brought into East Germany, the more they liked it, you know. And
when it all changed, of course, there's a wonderful symmetry to your story, really, because the Berlin Wall came down on the 9th of November 1989. Where were you that day?
I'm going to start crying now, because my mother's birthday is on the 12th of November, and I again managed to get a visa via my brother. So my son and I went to Berlin, and my cases didn't arrive, and I knew my family was waiting at Checkpoint Charlie on the other side. British Airways told me my luggage should arrive on the next flight. Our last flight was full of cameras. And I said, what's going on? And then she said to me, don't you know? And, don't you know the Checkpoint Charlie Friedrichstraße has opened up? And I just nearly collapsed. So I totally forgot about my cases. I said to my son, we have to go across. And then we were literally walking against what seemed like millions of people coming out of East Berlin into West Berlin. My son and I, we were the only ones trying to battle through to East Berlin. It was just an unbelievable sight. When we eventually arrived at the border, the policemen, East German police, were still sitting in their little cubby holes, that policeman said, you have a visa, you are allowed to go in and out, that's all. If you go in now and you come out, that's it. And here were millions of people coming.
Yeah. And how did your family feel about the wall coming down?
Well, we didn't really discuss it. And I don't actually know why, because much later then we would have discussed it, but at that time nobody knew whether that was going to be closed again.
And did you take a souvenir with you?
A souvenir? Oh yeah. My son and I, we went to Brandenburger Gate. It was just, for some reason, it was so important. I wanted Brandenburger Gate to open so that I'd be able to go through it. But the police were on top of the wall. There were loads and loads of camera teams from all over the world. So I said to Wolfie, now we've got to go and get some stones from the real wall, because, it was just... So I have at home the real thing, even with a little bit of writing on it, and that's in a crystal bowl.
A reminder, of course, that you were an eyewitness to history. You were an eyewitness to history on different stages of the wall.
Actually, yeah, on both occasions, which is so amazing.
Yeah,
and I get terribly emotional.
Well, it's very understandable. It's an extraordinary story, and we're very privileged that you've shared your story with us. Inga Eulitz, thank you very much. Back after this break.
Email The History Show, history@rte.ie.